Great. Good afternoon. So I'll tell a quick story to start. In 2014, I wrote an op-ed in local paper calling for curbing vaccination waivers. And Kathy Forsley, who's now the head of Oakland County Health and Human Services, called me in her office and said, let's talk about mutual interests. And in particular, how about we do some research together? And that's how I, as a philosophy professor, end up having something to say in this discussion. Here's a clicker. I've got no funding, I've got no conflicts, though if you want to talk after, that'd be great. Okay, that was supposed to be a joke, but it wasn't funny. If you got money, I would like your money. Okay. So I'm a big defender of Bob's intervention, of the introduction of the waiver education requirements for Michigan. And so one way to defend that is to talk about the alternatives. So one thing people say sometimes is, maybe we should think more about providers. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should think of immunization primarily as preventative medical treatment, and we should fall back on physicians and nurses in the clinic, in the hospital, to do a better job of talking to parents about this. And sometimes this is connected to a political critique. Maybe the government ought to get their hands out of my healthcare. Right? So this rhetoric at least resonates more broadly. I think there's some ethical reasons to resist. Right? So first off, right, immunization, as we know, is not only about preventative health care for you, but it's a way at a reasonable cost, near zero cost to yourself, to prevent yourself from harming others. So that's a social consequence of preventing interpersonal harm. It's also a political project. Immunization is part of the public's ongoing effort to create and maintain herd immunity, right, to protect those people who can't develop individual immunity. But if you don't want to hear ethical or political arguments, just take the fact that pediatricians don't want to have these conversations. 20 to 40% of pediatricians are now dismissing or refusing to accept families that are refusing vaccines. And just last year, the American Academy of Pediatrics reversed itself in a quite dramatic fashion. Up to this point, up to last year, it had consistently held that you should do everything you can to keep these families in your practice. Last year, they signed off, gave the green light to kicking these folks out, affirming a practice that was already well established. Clearly, physicians, practitioners of various sorts, are allies in public health fights, but we can't count on them to do all the heavy lifting. In fact, it looks like they're going to do less going forward for various reasons. To be clear, I'm not blaming them. They have their own set of incentives and disincentives that push against having these difficult conversations with vaccine-hesitant families. So one option is to go to make it a healthcare issue. The other option, the big option, the one on the table that gets a lot of discussion in public health circles, is the California option. Right? So in 2015, Governor Brown signed Senate Bill 277, which had the consequence, beginning in January 1st of 2016, of eliminating non-medical exemptions. Right, so Michigan tinkered a little bit with the program, right, made it a little bit harder, required the official form, you had to go to the Health Department for education, but maintained the exemptions. Some people say, why not just get rid of all of them? Just get rid of them. In fact, this is the official statement. This is the policy position preferred by both American Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Association of Family Physicians, and the American College of Physicians. And they not only call for state legislators to do this, they call on their state chapters to work with their state legislatures for the elimination of non-medical exemptions. And I think it's a horrible idea. Especially horrible in the context, so maybe I'll make some enemies today. I think it's a horrible idea, especially in the context of Michigan's fantastic success. I want to say a few things about that. So first, we know that when children, or their parents rather, are unable to get exemptions, they're going to pull their kids from school and daycare. But this is exactly the population you'd want under greater rather than lesser supervision. And in the context of insufficient supervision of folks in homeschooling, this all the greater loss, right? So we sometimes assume there's a one-to-one map between decreasing exemptions and increasing immunization, but that's not going to be the case for the most fervent people. And so what you're going to lose is kids losing out on school and losing out on other ways the state can look out for them. We're also seeing in California that especially financially vulnerable tuition-dependent private schools are being pulled in two directions. Right? They have every incentive in the world not to enforce this requirement and to offer conditional enrollment that just goes on in perpetuity, because otherwise they close. If the decision is close your school or selectively enforce the rule, they're going to push that as long as they can. We also seen, this is from a LA Times article from the end of last week, you're seeing a push from non-medical exemptions to medical waivers. The medical waiver rate in California tripled. So non-medical exemptions went to 0, but the medical exemption rate tripled. Why? Because physicians who would not otherwise be sympathetic with a claim for a medical exemption, now that they're no longer available at all, some of them are willing to sign these. In fact, 3 times as many of them. Right, so that's a discouraging trend. And then here's the thing that worries me the most, and that I'm actually panicked about. I wish if I could set the room on fire, I would. Efforts to eliminate exemptions cultivate political polarization. We in this country have a long-standing history of bipartisan consensus on the importance of immunization and the importance of immunization mandates. Right? So consider West Virginia and Mississippi have no non-medical exemptions. Right? But California's recent effort was passed on a party line vote. Almost all Democrats voted to eliminate the exemptions. Almost all Republicans voted to maintain them. A similar thing happened in Vermont. Vermont did not eliminate all exemptions. They just eliminated the philosophical ones. They kept the religious ones. They tried to split the baby in a weird way. Again, it was a party line vote. We cannot afford to have immunization policy become politically polarized. Right? This is a policy that, depending on the vaccine, you need 80 to 95% compliance. 50% plus 1 is not enough. And so we must do what we can at all to preserve public health, but also to maintain bipartisan consensus. So here's a line graph that's telling a lie. It's a line graph that appeared in LA Times a few months ago, accompanied by a story talking about the great success of California's Senate Bill 277 that eliminated the waivers. Okay. And so the stories accompanying this said, you see the great success of eliminating waivers. We're now sort of going from whatever that was, 92, 94, 96, pushing up to 98%. This is for measles and pertussis with the MMR series and the Tdap series. What they don't say is this. The bill that eliminated non-medical exemptions, this just zooms in, right? The bill that eliminated non-medical exemptions went into effect January 1st, 2016, so nothing on this line graph actually measures that at all. So it's just a lie that that's evidence for the success of Senate Bill 277. Some parents might have been anticipating the requirements of the bill, so you might make an argument there. Here's what this line graph actually shows, I think. There was a different bill, Assembly Bill 2109, passed in 2012, but went into effect in 2014. Oh, look, the point at which the line starts to inflect upwards. What did that bill require? Assembly Bill 2109 required mandatory education about immunization, about the risks of vaccine-preventable diseases and the benefits of vaccines. They did it differently than Michigan chose. They required physicians to sign an official state form and parents to actually document their own reasons on the form, but much the same way with a similar degree of success. Right? So from my point of view, the great shame of California is they had a law that was working, but what happened in 2014, 2015 in Orange County? Yeah, a dramatic high-profile measles outbreak, right, that caught the attention of some state legislators who actually did what we accuse sometimes vaccine-hesitant parents or vaccine-refusing parents of doing, that sort of captivated their imagination with a high-profile, emotionally evocative event that distracted them from the data that showed them their existing law was actually working, and they passed a law that now, right, removed parental liberty and further politically polarized, unnecessarily so, a vitally important aspect of public health. I got more to say. This is what tenure gives you. I can say what I want. I got to be careful. Bob won't give me any more data. No, I'm a big fan of Michigan. So look, they had an education bill, was working, and they screwed it up. And I just think from the ethical point of view, from a political, pragmatic point of view, if you can succeed for public health while preserving liberty, and in this case, preserving parental liberty, you should do that. Right? Even if you think the parents exercising this liberty are making the bad choice. Sorry, that's what liberty is. Right? It's a freedom to make choices, even those you don't agree with. I think, furthermore, one of the things that we should be glad that an education requirement does is it sorts the parents who they're on the fence. They're confused, they're a bit complacent, they're kind of a little worried. If you make it easy for them to refuse vaccines, they will, but if you make it a little harder, they're just as likely to go to the pediatrician's office and get the vaccines. And so what you do, you sort of nudge them with a bit of burdensomeness, and you sort. And this is a justice issue. If you've got a scarce number of resources, right, in this case, exemptions that you can give out and maintain herd immunity, you should give them to the people who really want them, right? And one way to give them to the people who really want them is you make them a little harder to get. Right? And so California saw that success, Michigan has seen that success, but there's another ethical reason, and that's that I think education surrounding vaccination and vaccine refusal contributes to something like informed consent, and that it's right for physicians, for public health, to be promoting informed consent at the same time they're promoting freedom. Okay. I got a paper on this, but if you want any papers that some of my comments are based on, please email me. We can talk. So what did Michigan's immunization education requirement accomplish? Well, from what I just said, you might think that what it accomplished was discouraging people from coming, right? And that we know from the previous literature. I also wanted to add to Bob's proof of concept. So Bob pointed to the 2014 rates that showed a difference between counties or local health departments that had already implemented education sessions prior to 2015 and those that hadn't, right? And you saw that those local health departments that had already implemented education requirements had lower rates. But here's even more evidence that Michigan's policy worked. If you look at the waiver rate reductions by county between 2014 and 2015, the counties that newly implemented the education sessions saw a waiver rate reduction that was 27 times greater than the waiver rate reduction in those counties that had already been doing it. Right? So this is about as close as we're going to get to a causal evidence of a causal claim here. A pretty strong association. But as I've said, the evidence for doing this, the reasons you might be motivated, Bob and I have talked about this, the primary reason people point to is this sorting the convenience waivers from the committed waivers. But that distracts attention, and the research gives us good reasons to think that that's right. But what about the people who actually showed up? Are we just wasting their time? I gave a talk once and someone said, if you're just wasting their time, you might as well have them come run around the track a few times and have them do some push-ups. In fact, as a paper, someone said you should, one of my colleagues in the Netherlands wrote and said, Navin's wrong about this education stuff. You should just have people come and make school lunches and contribute otherwise to public health. So what is actually going on? Well, so here's some data on subsequent immunization behavior in Oakland County. So really quickly, and I can give you more data in a longer paper if you're interested. We got about 4,000, I get data on about 4,000 children whose parents or guardians sought exemptions through Oakland County in 2015. Of those, 657 subsequently received a vaccine their parents initially refused. Right, so that's 16.4%. It looks like success, and it's 1 out of 6. That's pretty good if you take someone who's committed enough to show up for the education session and you talk them into at least one vaccine. I'm a little worried that that's actually not what it shows, but maybe it still shows something good. Of the 657 who subsequently got a vaccine, 463 of those were people who said they were alternative schedulers. So these were not people who were committed vaccine refusers anyway. Strangely enough, though, the people who said they were an alternative schedule, only 40% of them later got a vaccine. I got to move because I could talk about this data all time. But I mean, so we actually sorted between people whose reasons for rejecting could be understood as religion. Those people, actually, they look like true believers. Only a 4.4% rate of vaccinating subsequently for a vaccine they refused. Safety people, 8.1%. Those are people who talked about vaccine complications or about autism. Disease people. So this is people who said, well, the vaccine-preventable diseases aren't very dangerous or not very common, or that I'd rather have my kid get natural immunity. We're going to the pox parties. These people, 10.5% are able to pick up. So we can ask sort of questions about the dedication of resources to this effort. 2 minutes, and I'm on the way out. Really quickly, so I also interviewed 39 nurses across the state that do these education sessions. And they said some really interesting things, and I'm going to just say 1 minute worth. What they said was at first we tried to talk parents out of it, and we learned very quickly that wasn't going to work. And so instead, we later came to think about the work we were doing as selling public health, its political importance, its community importance, about cultivating trust through non-adversarial, sympathetic listening, and hoping we were planting seeds for the future by helping parents to plan for health care of children who are not protected against vaccine-preventable diseases. What more can be done? A lot can be done. We're living in a culture of a crisis of trust. 40% of evangelicals in Alabama said that the fact that Roy Moore was accused of child abuse made them more likely to vote for him. I don't think that's because evangelicals are pro-child abuse. It's because they don't trust the Washington Post. And whether that's the right thing to do or not, that's another discussion. We live in a crisis of trust. If I could solve that problem, I would. But one little thing that can be done, and I want to point to Terry, is we can make the case that people who are like you are vaccinating. We are social beings. We line up behind the flag that is our flag. And we have lots of different flags for lots of different communities. And so one thing to do, and I imagine Terry's going to talk about this because I think it's a great program and a great success, is to be on social media, be on Facebook, be on YouTube with testimonials from parents about how vaccination is a part of how they parent their children. So we reflect back to parents not only the image of vaccine hesitancy and refusal that's so prevalent in the culture, but also the much more common, much more prevalent culture of vaccination. Thank you.